What can I say about this watch? Um, it's very difficult not to laugh because this is by far the best value for money watch I've ever bought, and it's just incredible. I'm laughing all the way. Uh, yeah, so this is going to be another addition to the design review, where I do a follow-up review of the watch and now talk about it from a design standpoint and go into special details about how it's been made and how legible and useful it is. So let's see, I've owned the watch for over 2 weeks now and also wear it very religiously. It is so comfortable. It's a guilty pleasure in a lot of ways because we know what this thing is trying to homage. If it wasn't for the name on the dial, it would look like a Royal Oak, and it feels like a Royal Oak. It is just, I just can't praise this thing enough. I think there's going to be a lot of awing and ahhing throughout this video, so do excuse me. So let's go down through the wire. Let's explain. Bracelet, I mean, if I had to hold this thing to the light and I play, I mean, it's so beautiful. It is so nice. This watch has really grown on me. From the beginning, I was a bit skeptical of having tank treads for a bracelet, but it is, yeah, the design really speaks to me. As an industrial designer and knowing the history behind this piece, you cannot but sit in awe and appreciate a watch of this kind. And knowing that it was designed within an evening, you know, the Nautilus was designed in 5 minutes, and this was designed over the course of 1 day by Gerald Genter. It's an awesome story, and it's what you would call a stroke of brilliance. It's like a lightning in a bottle. Designers, when they come up with something as original as this in such a short period of time, and you find that always happens, that when you commit to something, you find the simplest idea and the most efficient idea suddenly just comes to you, like the name of a business, like, yeah. And this is just one of them. This is something that has become a complete icon in the world of watches, and it was done within a day. Some of us designers are just like that. You end up stumbling onto an idea and it sticks. So the design is freaking amazing. I can't stop looking at this bracelet because it really is something. The build quality is second to none, and it blows me away that I've bought this watch for this price, because the machining and the tooling required for a watch like this is unlike any other brand, because I mean it's flawless. All the components that have gone into this are picture perfect to what the real watch, you know, consists of. And the tools for making these parts are not cheap, so I have absolutely no idea how these were turned out so well and so efficiently. The clasp itself, double deployant, very nicely milled, nice and thick too, something I didn't specify in the last video. There's a great amount of thickness to the clasp, and it allows it to be very solidly placed inside its housing. Screwed in links, something I specified in the last video, and it wears very comfortably. Since my last video, I realized something else. Because the case diameter is 41 millimeters and it's quite a big watch, I mean, the way the links sit on the wrist, they aren't exactly conforming. The way I wore the watch tended to flick backwards very often and not sit flush on the wrist. So what I did was I moved a link from the front of the watch to the back of the watch. So now we have how many? We have 4 links at the back and we have 3 links in the front. And what that allows is for the watch to sit perfectly flat on the wrist, which is what I'll show you now. So hit the double deployant, you push the top down, bottom down. It now sits a lot more flat on the wrist and doesn't move around, which is great. So it's so much more comfortable now, which is awesome. And it doesn't feel so much like a bangle anymore. Something I specified in my last video is that when you're wearing it, it feels like a wooden bangle. It has a lot of rigidity to it, that is for sure. I mean, if I take it off and put closer together, you'll notice that the bracelet is very rigid in its form factor. It doesn't conform like an oyster bracelet. So it does have a very different feel to an oyster bracelet. It doesn't hug the wrist so much. Actually, I would say it hugs the wrist, but in a very different way. What the selling point is that these treads, because they're so finely finished and well positioned and connected to the bracelet, it sits very comfortably. very, very comfortably. So let's talk about the design. Now, I should just criticize this from an AP Royal Oak standpoint, since this is practically an AP Royal Oak. Notice that if you saw my last video, actually I'll tell you about that later in case you haven't, because some of us OCD guys, once you see it, you won't stop looking at it throughout the review. So let's get through the rest. So talking to it from a design standpoint, the legibility is second to none, which is something I really appreciate. You know, if we had in the dark, for example, you can easily see the hands, you can easily see the numerals. It's all equally spaced, very nicely laid out. It is extremely, extremely legible. And that is something that I was very impressed by. The readability of the watch dial is excellent. Having all the separate numerals being highlighted in white also really plays to that strength. So the watch really is an excellent watch for the sake of legibility. And it is such a nice culmination of things. If I can try and stay within the realms of realism, but also go a little bit abstract, the watch is very retro modern in its design. You know, it's timeless by far. And what I think it does, which is important, is that it's a very impressive combination of interesting and boring at the same time. You know, it's a very good in between. It doesn't have any functions to it. It doesn't have a chronograph. It doesn't have a rotating bezel. But what it has is an extremely attractive bracelet that is mind-blowing, eye-opening. At the same time, it is extremely legible, and it is something you can look at because of the details. Now, if this just was a matte black dial, and you know, if it had a crown that was circular, and if the edges were rounded, and there was no feature of screws on the actual casing itself, it would not be as interesting. You know, it would be a little bit boring. Now, I've pretty much summed up what the Nautilus is like, but in that way, the Nautilus is a lot more refined for a reason, because it's a Patek, and Patek likes to keep themselves minimalistic and basic. I was trying to get that hair out the picture. So, right. So looking at this, we look at the tapisserie dial. That is a feature that always draws you in to look at the watch more, okay? And that's important. You know, the detail is there. The screws on the outside of the case, and having a hexagonal crown, it's a brilliant idea, because for the sake of gripability and windability, it is very easy to grip and to use. There's a bit of a click when you push it down, but that's all good, and it screws down very well into the case. Now, something else I should cover, and this is another design-related aspect, is that this design, along with the Nautilus, doesn't hide its features. Or should I would say it turns its so-called flaws into features. And by that I mean, if we look at a company like Apple, I'm going to play with, and Samsung, for example, when they construct their phones and their electronics, they refrain from including the things that hold the phone and their devices together. They don't, I mean, showing them, should I say. And what is awesome about a watch like this and the Nautilus is its honesty, because you have all the components that the watch consists of. You know, it's put together with screws on the sides. You can see that. When you turn it over, you see all the screws that are holding the case back down. Very nice case back, by the way. I can get into some macro shots of that just now. And importantly, all the hexagonal screws that hold down the top part of the bezel are on display, which is very true to form. It's not hiding anything from you. And I think when you own a design of that kind, or when you see a design of that kind, you should really appreciate it. Gerald Genter was able to turn the so-called flaws of the manufacturing into features on the final design, and you can never falter that. So it's honest in that way, and I think that's very, very powerful. Again, you're able to look at the dial and really appreciate all the little details. If there was more light outside, you'd be able to see the reflectability of the hands and the numbers, or sort of say the numerals on the dial. And when you turn it in certain lights, some of them light up, some of them disappear. It's very, very flashy. So it's a very good balance between formal and informal. It's got a very nice sports watch appeal, but also it's got a very nice jewelry appeal. So I mean, it just balances out perfectly. I don't think I should have said it's a good combination of boring and interesting, because it is extremely interesting. Talking about the watch itself, let's go back into what this watch is about. The movement is a Miyota, and it is as reliable as a Miyota, as reliable as a Miyota is. It does run fast, and I think that's just to do with it warming up and getting used to being worn on a daily basis. You know, it's pretty common for Miyotas to speed up in the beginning. So maybe once a week I wind it back maybe a minute, but other than that, it has been working flawlessly. The date changing, I mean, if you look at the date situated in the window, it's very nicely spaced and placed in the center. The awesome open case back is nice to look at. You get to see the pendulum moving. Really nice touch. This watch has been made with incredible care and attention to detail. And I should specify, the one thing that has that I haven't touched and I've decided not to is the dial, which is a little bit offset. As you can see, it's not centered, it's a little bit to the left. And as an eagle-eyed viewer pointed out, the actual logo of this company is offset too. It's actually at an angle. But as you can see, when the light passes over it, a lot of the time, so say 2/3 of the time, this crest is in the light. So you don't tend to see it because it's so highly polished. It disappears in the light, so you don't notice it. But again, for something like £50 that I paid for this thing, it is unreal how well performing it's been and how comfortable and usable it is. The AP has really grown on me. The question is, would you then spend £15,000 on a real Royal Oak? And my honest answer and opinion is yes, I would, because the design has really spoken to me. It's really grabbed me and got me interested. What bothers me is that the markup that these companies put on these watches is unreal. I mean, I bought this thing for just over £50. Okay, it uses the same steel, 316L steel, surgical stainless steel. It has an automatic movement. It does not have sapphire crystal. It has mineral glass. But I mean, this thing is not supposed to be used for diving and for smashing against the walls. It's a dress watch. It has mineral glass at the back. It has the same deployant clasp, and it has a Japanese automatic movement. So the question is it worth spending? I would say, what's the percentage increase? You know, it's like 10,000% increase on a watch of a similar aesthetic, same build quality. I mean, down to the nearest detail, apart from maybe how it's assembled around the dial. Is it really worth it spending that much money on a watch like that when you can own the design that you appreciate, which is this? I now fully appreciate the design of this, for a fraction of the cost. It's a very interesting debate, something I would like to discuss with you in the comments if you're interested. But fantastic watch. If you're still on the fence on buying one of these things, go for it. They do also supply a quartz movement version, which I think is an excellent idea, because the back of the case, this case back piece, is a lot flatter with the quartz movement, and it's solid, so you don't see anything inside. What they don't do is they don't include a model that doesn't have a second hand that ticks, which is a bit of a bummer, because most of the quartz watches of the time in the 70s didn't have a ticking second hand, because it just ruined the aesthetic. Being able to just see the hands and no movement is pretty nice. So if they could do that, that would be awesome. But what's to say? I mean, say a year down the line this movement decides to conk out on me, I can either get it fixed or maybe buy an ETA 2824 and put it inside this, and this watch will be bulletproof for the rest of its life. And really, for the build quality, this watch is worth every penny. It is something to really behold. So I've been sold on the design by far, sold on its appeal, its subtlety, but shouty nature. It's very, very quiet, but it does have that little bit of flair. It's almost like the genius kid who sits in the back of the room and doesn't say a word and gets 98% in his exam, and everyone wonders who the hell he was, where he came from. That's what this watch speaks to me as. Something extremely subtle, but in the right light, at the right moment, it is something really to behold. I'm talking more about the design of the watch than anything else, so yeah. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'd like to personally thank all of the new subscribers I have to this channel. I really appreciate your support and your interest in these videos. I plan to make many more in the future, as long as I receive watches and things to review. So if you're interested in contacting me, I think I've provided my email on the About page. But that's as far as I'll go with the design review. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.